You're very welcome to the Confident Women Islands YouTube channel and in our collaboration with Irish Political Roundup. We are continuing our theme of navigating your child confidently through the 4Ds of learning difficulties or differences: dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and dyspraxia. But joining me back on the program to discuss this is Bernie Rogers. Bernie is an NLP professional trainer and coach with the NLP Training Institute and is based in Waterford. And also joining us is Lucy Heary. She is based in Kilkenny and she has her company called Children's Learning Coach. And we're going to learn more about that in a couple of moments. We have been talking for the last, say, year, Paul and myself, on the Irish Political Roundup about children and adult learners navigating confidently through their learning experiences and in how they learn and absorb information in their everyday life. So I'm delighted to have my NLP coach and trainer with us again. And Lucy has a vast amount of experience in, as we said, in the children's learning coach, and she's going to share all her knowledge and nuggets of wisdom as well. So moving straight on, Lucy, would you like to start off would you like to tell the audience of who you are and what you do in your words?
Delighted, Roisin, and thank you for having me here today. So I'm Lucy Heary. I am an educator since the last century, as I tell children, and they think this is hilarious. So I'm decades as a primary school teacher initially, music educator, and then got curious about how children who aren't learning the way we expect are learning differently. And so that took me into all kinds of areas, delving into what's going on behind the behavior, what's going on behind the words, which led me into NLP, similar to Bernie, and into a concept called empowering learning, developed by Olive Hickmott in the UK and worldwide at this point, which helps us understand visual learners in particular. And then behind that, I got interested in the emotional state that we as educators and parents and as children, collaborate and students all need to be in order to be in an effective learning state. So I kind of bring all those strands together, and MBIT coaching, which is my most recent one, which is your head, heart, and your gut wisdom. And I feed all that into working with children on an individual basis with their parent, and also popping into a school and working that way, just helping children realize that there are more ways to learn.
That's really fascinating. Can't wait to get into that in a moment. Bernie, would you just like to remind our viewers who you are and what you do?
Thanks, Roisin, and great to be back again. I'm Bernie Rogers. I am an NLP trainer and coach and an MBIT trainer and coach. I train primarily adults in neuro-linguistic programming. For me, it's all about tapping into our own excellence and learning how we communicate with ourselves and with other people. And Lucy has mentioned MBIT as well. I train MBIT, which is multiple brain integration techniques, a really long name for a wonderful process that gets us in touch with the intelligences of our head, our heart, and our gut, and how to use them. As I said, I primarily work with adults at this moment in time, and I worked with young children in a voluntary capacity for over 20 years.
And Bernie, in our previous interview, which I will have a link to in our description box, we talk about the different types of NLP learning, and you have clipboard chart papers up behind you. Would you like to just give our viewers, so they might then click the link to discover more about each learning styles in a moment? But would you like to just give us a synopsis of that?
I will indeed. So briefly, what we spoke about was the fact that we learn through our senses. Each of us learns through our senses, and we don't only learn in one way. We learn by using all of our senses. And primarily when we're talking about our senses, we're talking about seeing, hearing, and feeling. And sometimes tasting and smelling and talking to ourselves comes in under the auditory part or the kinesthetic part of seeing, hearing, and feeling. And depending on the context, we have a preference sometimes for one over the other, but we're using all of our senses all of the time. And when we as adults are aware of that, when we're working either with other adults or other young children, it can help us to design our communication so that it lands much easier with the people that we're speaking to and teaching or supporting. What we also spoke about was the fact that it's really useful to tune in, to hear, and to notice whether somebody is using primarily seeing, hearing, or feeling language that'll give us indications. It's also useful to be aware of some learning theories, and the one I spoke about was David Kolb's theory, because he says that ideally to have a well-rounded learning experience, we all need to include an element of planning, an element of doing, an element of reflecting, and an element of linking into what we're doing. And it's kind of like a circle. You can see behind me there that there's an element of all four. And a lot of us have a preference for 1, 2, or 3, and not necessarily all four. So if we're designing trainings or lesson plans for young children, it's used to involve all four. And then we spoke about the ladder of learning or the staircase of learning. And this is one of the things that the people that I work with find most useful, whether they're 6 or whether they're 66 or 106. And that basically says that, so when we boil it down, it's the fact that we learn through practice, through application and practice and practice and practice and practice. And there'll be things that we're absolutely brilliant at because we unconsciously know them. And there'll be things that we don't know. And when we find something that we're going to learn, a new skill, a new subject, whatever it is, if we don't realize that we go through a cycle of learning, we can give up. So if we don't realize, it's quite natural to be not aware and to understand and to be challenged with learning and to get it wrong. And if we're not comfortable with that, it can be challenging. And then we move through stages where, having practiced a whole load, it becomes part of us, it becomes unconscious to what we do. And then the fourth one we spoke about was Bernice McCarthy's format system, where if we understand why we're doing something, what's in it for us, then we have the facts and the figures, the important bits that we need to know, then get to experience it, and then bring it out into the world. It gives us that well-rounded learning experience, and herself and Kolb match very well together. And then if you put the ladder of learning and learning through your senses over that, you have a real well-rounded learning experience and an awareness for both the young people and the adults.
And we briefly, which we'll talk about more in depth today, is about being in the state, in that emotional and mental state, and the state of learning, which I remember that I actually had to put into practice a few years ago. I remember consciously doing it and saying it to myself. And it was really powerful when you have that conscious awareness of doing, okay, I need to get into the state of learning. I need to be in that present moment. To me, it's like getting into that present moment and absorbing all that information and then trying to retain it, But and then linking up all the different learning styles. So I think it was so, because I went through it personally and physically, and possibly because I went through it in my 40s, that it really, and after I did the training with the life coach, the ILI, the Irish Life Coach Institute, and then the NLP with yourself and Joe, when I put it into practice, I actually saw, felt, heard just how powerful it was. And it's really changed my life when you actually put everything into practice yourself. And you're actually going, okay, I have to practice what I preach here. And then you know the power of it instead of just telling people because you've experienced it. And it just changed your whole physiology and your whole learning experience. And this is why I'm so passionate about these interviews and what we're doing with navigating your child through the 4Ds of learning differences and difficulties. There's so many sort of names for everything and descriptors for everything. And sometimes I go, sometimes it can be quite negative. They go, people call it learning disabilities. And I go, it's not a disability. But once you realize, and we'll talk about it, it's a different way of thinking. It's a different way of approaching things. It's a different problem solving, and look to the strengths and manage the weaknesses, as Marcus Buckingham would say. But no, so I'm really interested. Lucy, I'll come to you now. We've just talked about the NLP, which learning styles, which we'll still continue to talk about. But you're an educator, and educators, I know when I was delivering as a professional trainer, talking and training the trainer courses, we went through all the VARC learning styles. Do they use the VARC learning styles in academic and in the educational system?
Well, Roisin, I think the awareness of VARC in relation to what Bernie said about learning through our senses, the awareness and the study of is still there. I think typically a lot of us are still talkers and expecting our listeners to be auditory learners. And sometimes just the nature of how we communicate is speaking and listening. So I do think that the auditory part, the visual part, but sometimes it goes out of balance. And you mentioned VARC with the R part, the read and write part of how we take in our information. I think all the awareness is there, putting it into practice, and also having our learner become aware of how I learn, and how I learn maybe differently in one context or environment, or differently in another. Because say, for example, me, I love to see things and I love to be doing things. I'm here fiddling away with my pen, but I always like to be moving and doing things. But I'm also a musician, and I am better at listening, getting immersed in a piece of music, first of all, and then playing it by ear, as opposed to reading it, which nearly seems to be like a paradox. Oh, if you're a visual person, would you not prefer to see the music? So it doesn't always fit into nice little boxes of how I learn or how a child learns. And I think, as Bernie mentioned, it is so useful to know and to be aware of how else can I learn and what else can I add in, and that autonomy developing as a child gets older because of their experiences. So many teachers are teaching with loads of visuals, with loads of kinesthetic, with loads of movement. And I think the more of these elements that are added into the teaching and learning process, and this has become, even since I trained, it was all about teaching, which was nearly like inputting and submitting. And whereas now it's the teaching and learning. There's no point in me teaching away stuff if I don't feel that my learner is actually learning. And for them to be learning in a way that fits, I need to be aware of all the potential ways that that learning can seep in and connect to what was learned before. Because I remember years ago hearing, oh, I learned it. No, you didn't learn it, because if you learned it, you'd know it. But a child who thinks, oh, I may go back again and learn it again. Now, even the words learn again doesn't make sense, because if it was learned, it'd be installed and it'd be mine. I'd have held on to it and made a connection. So that brings us to the strategy of the learning. So if I go to learn it the same way I tried to learn it before, I think Einstein said that we keep trying to get a different result by doing the same thing again and again and again, and hoping for a different result the next time if I do more of it. But if I'm doing more of it, which is the practice element of what Bernie said, if I keep practicing something in a way that is not going to benefit my learning, then it's a waste of time. It's like practicing a piece of music and getting the same note wrong the whole time, but I'm actually reinforcing getting that note wrong all the time if I don't stop and go, what is it about this piece of music, or what is it about this word or this maths concept that I need to either look at in a different way or have it presented to me in a different way. And that's where the learning can really get emphasized and kind of expanded. But it is, as you said, to find out about how am I learning best? Do I like a visual for certain things? Do I like to go do it and maybe combine it with the visual? Oh, I'm looking and seeing, but I maybe need to do something. Is it useful for me to listen all the time? Or does that listening even need to be broken down into small chunks? As I'm listening, what else is useful? So I think everybody will have their strengths of style, but I do know at one point there was an experiment with teachers, or a suggestion that each teacher would teach separately to each learning style in front of them, which is cumbersome and doesn't necessarily land where it's meant to. I think that's when learning styles came up as a concept of difference, you know, going back a good few years. So now when anybody is imparting information, if we can realize how many ways can I encompass my language, what I'm presenting, how I'm going to follow it up, and all those things that will give a sensory experience and connect particularly to the strengths of the learner. So, you know, I've lots of little boys and girls, particularly, who love moving. And if I ask them to sit still and listen and pay attention, the learning might not happen, because their bodies somatically, they need to move. So I often do rhymes for words and things, but we're moving or we're playing with toys, and you're adding in so many, you're drenching them in a sensory experience and bringing in your learning, your desired learning outcome at the same time.
That's really powerful, isn't it? Because a lot of children, especially if them, my son was the same. He couldn't sit still, and he's dyslexic and dysgraphia, where he can't get what is in his head onto paper, and when you often hear the teachers, oh, he can, and that was one thing that a teacher said to me, he can't sit still. But so then I used to take him for a walk and get him to learn his timetables going for a walk.
Yeah.
And I knew if he was moving, and it's the same, like even changing your emotional state or your mental state. If you move, that moves as well. So it's about how you take in, knowing how you take in that information, how you absorb it, and what memories trigger in as well as when how you learnt it, where you learnt it. You might hear the word, you might hear how something was spelt, or even down to the tone of how you learnt something.
Absolutely. Sitting still, like way back, sitting still was almost like a badge of honor. If you sat still, you were going to learn well. You know, can't sit still in class would frequently have been written on reports going back through the decades. And, you know, stillness has obviously got its wonderful, in its context, stillness is wonderful. But, you know, if you stop a child who likes to rock or likes to, you know, do this, as long as it's not interfering with everybody else around them, it's okay to move, and or to maybe introduce huge ways of moving with a big group of children, because that will benefit all of them. As you said yourself, going for a walk, or even just standing up, physically doing something to do tables or words or anything, you know, that typically we would have had to sit still and pay attention. So it's interesting, our attention will go where our focus goes. If we're interested and something doesn't have to be dramatic with bells and whistles all of the time, but if I'm engaged as a learner, even if the topic isn't really interesting to me, but if what is happening is, then I'll remember it a bit more.
And sometimes now, even now, if I'm learning something, or if I'm even learning new information that I have to know, I would probably either be sitting down reading or doing my little mind map. I walk a lot with mind maps, and I would have to hear it, see it, hear it, and then do a mind map. And then I would go and do something. It might be emptying the dishwasher. It might be hanging out the washing on the line while I'm here. It could be just even hoovering the stairs, the only place I have carpet. But and then so I'm up doing. I'm sitting down and then I'm moving, and then I'm going over the information in my head what I've just discovered or absorbed. So knowing what way you learn is so empowering. So let's talk about states. We hinted on it in our previous interview, Bernie. So Bernie, talk to us about states, and then we'll make it a conversation, ladies, between the two of you and the three of us about states, getting into the right state for learning. I think that is one of the most powerful things to do, is to get your child or your adult learner or you as a learner getting into the right state to learn.
Absolutely. State is absolutely everything. And sometimes if people are of a certain age, to talk about state might have negative connotations around it. But from an NLP perspective, when we talk about state, we're literally talking about how we're being inside at any given moment in time. And if you think about it, if we were here and we suddenly remembered that we forgot to get milk or we left the tap running or whatever, we're not in the best state to be present and to take part in this conversation. So it could be something as simple as that. Or it could be the fact that we might have a belief around, well, I find it difficult to learn. Like Lucy said, I couldn't learn something like this the last time, therefore I'm not going to learn this time. So if we have an awareness as adults working with young children, and if they have an awareness of how important it is to be in the right state, they can figure out for themselves with our help what is the right state for them to be in. What's the best way for them to be in for themselves to learn. And we as adults can figure out, well, what's the best way for me to be if I'm doing homework with my child, or if I'm in school and we're doing a lesson on, language or English or history or whatever. And I've listened to Lucy before talk about the importance of state and learning state, and there's loads of different ways and loads of simple activities that we can do to get ourselves into the right state. And as Lucy mentioned earlier, for me, awareness is kind of 99% of it. And then the other kind of 1% would be making sure I take action on it. So, am I aware of how I'm being? Do I need to be different? And if I do, what can I do to bring myself into the best possible state to be doing homework or to be delivering a lesson or, to be learning as a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old or whatever.
I remember, because I used to teach adult education, and it was Marcus who was used to be with the ILI, and I remember talking to other because he was teaching coaching the coaching training in Waterford. I was in Portlaoise, and people, if they missed one module, they would come. Could go to other modules in other areas. And they came up, and I used this. And he said to the group, now, at the very start, he said, if there is anything that you need to do or a phone call that you need to make, and it's going to stop you from enjoying today, or it's going to be on your mind, go out and do it now, and then come back. And I thought that is so powerful. So then, if I'm training or doing anything, I'll go, if there's anything you need to do, go now and do it, and feel good about going and leaving either the room or the Zoom place, switching off your camera or leaving completely will let you back in, because then they can come back into the room knowing they have that phone call, that text. Did they leave the handbrake on the car? Did
Or
is
the
it
immersion on at home, that's a bit harder.
the
Yeah.
Irish thing, the immersion? But all them things is so important. So Lucy, talk to us about that.
So so obviously with children, you're not going to be sending them off. However, the part that I'm taking just from your story there is, how am I starting? How am I, as Bernie said, how am I being when I'm expected to learn? And if a child, and Bernie referred to this as well, if their self-belief is, I can't, or I'm stupid, or I something negative, what happens already is there's a level of fear and anxiety, and with that comes a release of cortisol, which floods the system, that impedes the brain, that kind of starts to a freeze sensation in the body, and already the child's on a back foot. So what can we do if we're not set to something, because we can't talk directly to children like you would to an adult learner and compartmentalize or sort that out or whatever. So how do we enable children to do that? And some of the most simple ways are the most effective ways, and they're free and they're invisible. And they have to do with the breath. They have to do with, as children are brilliant because they're so creative, getting them to visualize, not in a big long mindfulness session, but in a really short, empowering way. How can I see what I want to see in the room? How can I see myself being a bit different? How can I feel? And it's usually, I get children to imagine that they're a tree, and we see trees and wind and they're moving all around the place. And unless it's a huge, huge storm, well, typically I wouldn't even mention the word, but trees are moving, but they're staying in the one place. That's because they've got roots. And I'd often even go out and bring in a big weed of something that has big, long, long roots to demonstrate they've long, long roots, but then guide them through a little, very short sequence of them putting their roots down. And down, down, down into the ground, down to the floor of your class or wherever you're sitting. And maybe they're attached to the soles of your feet. And maybe they have a colour. What colour would yours be? And they all come up with a colour straight away. So immediately they've come out of that fearful sense into a playful way. But through that, there's a grounding. And we all know about being earthed and grounded and centred. And without elaborating on that for children, they're automatically doing it. And combining that with particularly a breath through the nose. I always say, let your lips gently close. Breathe gently through your nose, both in and out, because again, that's meant to stop cortisol. There's some little nitric oxide thingy going on in the back of the nose that stops the flooding of cortisol through the system. And if we can get children just to reset with a nose breath and looking up, because when we look up, we're looking out of our negative emotions. Typically, like, our words reflect that. Oh, I was down in the dumps. I was downhearted. Oh, look up, it's wonderful. Or I'm uplifted. So raising the gaze is another way. So I get children to maybe look where the wall and the ceiling meet, which is probably where you are, Bernie, and you are, Roisin, right now. If you look up and see where your wall and the ceiling meet. Well done, Bernie. And as you do that, just even flick your eyes, Roisin. It doesn't have to be big this because it's invisible. You can do it in the classroom invisibly, or at home, or as you get into the car and there's no ceiling, just look up to where the roofs are and the chimney tops and the tops of trees and breathe. And it sounds so, so simple because it is. And effectively it works. And what that does very subtly, and build up a practice of that, brings us into calm body, alert mind. So you're grounding and you're looking up, and it's like a lovely little balance. And that's the optimal learning state.
And that is also one of the part of the NLP, the eye movements. And if you're in a low emotional state, look up.
Absolutely.
And I have a habit now of doing that when I go to the supermarket, if I'm outside. If I'm thinking about something, I automatically just look up at the sky to see the clouds. And how it automatically you just do it. And I go, oh, I'm doing it automatically.
But we used to do it as children when you'd be asked something in class, and you go, and then maybe a not so nice moocher would say, it's not written on the ceiling. But it actually was in here. By looking up, we're accessing that visual part of the brain that has held on to all those images. Maybe not clear images, but as soon as you look up, it's like a little tick, 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 back to the occipital temporal lobe here at the back of the brain, which holds all our images and may have been connected to a sound or a doing or a something else. But often our memories, our previous learning gets stored as an image. And so you now are doing it on purpose, Roisin. Oh gosh, what was that thing? And automatically, consciously looking up. So if we in a learning state consciously look up, or when I'm getting children to learn, it won't be down here flat on the table. It will be up in their visual, wherever they're seeing it. And that's the inquiry that would happen beforehand, particularly for very creative children who may or may not be told that they're dyslexic. Usually they've a really creative, fast-moving, fast-paced brain, which has loads of images. And so the inquiry is to notice how are they seeing what they're seeing, and fiddle around with that in a playful way to slow it and still it and give them autonomy over their images. And they could be words or pictures, or when I'm teaching spelling or maths, it's actually layering those two together, which is quite interesting for a parent to observe when they haven't seen that before. And it's so empowering for a child. I've taught lots of 10-year-olds who couldn't spell their surnames, which is kind of embarrassing when you're 10 because they had long surnames. And they were able to find a new way of learning in 20 minutes. And it's like this. And again, belief changes, everything changes when there's a different strategy. So that's like, if I keep learning the way I was told to learn that's not working, it's only going to compound my feeling, my belief in myself that is, I can't. So combining that with state, and I usually say emotional state, or how you're feeling, and how can that enhance how you are going to be, and when you're being and doing, then you're going to learn in a much more effective way.
Lucy, I'm just thinking if parents were watching this, and they're watching this, and their children come home with homework, and they come home in a really bad emotional state, which children do. They can keep it up, mask it really well in school, and then they come home, and the mother, as a mother, as soon as they walk out that gate, or as soon as they walk towards you in the car park or wherever you're collecting, it's exactly, oh, they've had a bad day. Oh, they've had a good day. You just know. Even if you don't see them walking, you know how they get into the car. So what tips would you give as a teacher and as an educator? What tips would you give them, or advice you would give them, even 3 things or more if you have them, in when they come home, to actually change their child's emotional state and their belief in learning their home, and maybe change the emotional state, their belief in learning what they learned in school, to actually sit down confidently to do their homework.
Well, probably a few million things involved in all of that, Roisin. I would say, the first thing as a parent, who's been like both sides of the fence as a parent and educator, is first a pause. Just because sometimes the tendency is, when the child comes out the gate or into the car walking home, is, well, how did you get on at school today? I've just left school. And if things have been hard, sometimes even that question. So maybe just pause, even as a parent. And this is where, when Bernie was talking about our own emotional state being so critical, that if we start asking those questions, particularly if we have a concern that's been ongoing, our very, very sensitive children will just subconsciously say, oh, here, I'm being asked this question again. What will I say? So already we're setting up a higher bar of worry. So to dissipate that a little, it's important for us to have our own state. And we can do that again by breathing, whatever other techniques we have, or something happy, or telling a funny story. And humor is brilliant. All kinds of humor is just priceless when it comes to diffusing situations. So if you're in the car coming home, something funny about me or something else, but it's not about you, the child just come out of school straight away. So that's what I'd suggest nearly initially, is just a little pause, because the day might have gone well, but there was a lot of stuff going on there. The day might have gone well except for this thing. And this thing that was a small thing colours the whole of the day. So I think just a little break between all of that and going home, hopefully to the safe place, the comfortable place, food on the table or whatever. But when it comes to the homework, and again, this is something that would build up with practice and being aware, as Bernie said, of our language and how we're speaking to our children. And typically, as parents, it's, come on, let's get this done fast. Let's get the homework out of the way. So even our language implies it's a thing that has to be got out of the way. And we could rephrase that, even just reset it with as a question. Gosh, I never knew about that. Can you tell me something? So make me the parent into the learner, and the child has something new to tell, rather than let's get all these questions done, or what's that? Oh, listen, and even that, I'm wincing now. So a child is going to read my face as a parent. Oh, we better do the homework, and everything is. So to change that is, let's have a look. What's the funniest thing you heard in school today? Or what's the most interesting thing that teacher said? Or tell me about this. And it could be anything. And that maybe is just a little avenue into the rest of whatever the work is. What way do you want to start? Give a bit of choice is always lovely if you can. And again, if you've got 4 children for homework, that's a different scenario. If you're around the table, as I know one parent said, well, where do I start with him? Because I have 3 others and they're all at different levels. So I'd suggest just having, if you are working with one child, just suggest which will be the best thing to do first, and vary it. Or if the child is a visual, loves the visual, and I did this for all my children, I used to write lists with little square boxes for ticking off. And that gives a great sense of, oh, I'm finished this part, or which part will we do? Because again, if we're only talking, it's overwhelming. And you could have diagrams, and it doesn't matter about your drawing skills, or circles with this bit here, this bit there, and draw what we're going to do. Is it a maths thing? Is it a reading thing? And then the thing, maybe that's the hard thing. If it is spelling, what other ways have we of doing that that's different? If it's story and there's too much text, break it down with me doing most of it. Depending on the level of the child, a junior infant or a senior infant, if they're looking for a word, maybe just hold the word up by itself, just scribble it in a bit of paper, hold it up. Well, every time you come to that word, will you say it? And I'm going to tell the rest of the story, because I love telling stories. So it's, again, about state. It's about, and it can't be done always. Like, we're not going to be totally Disney about homework. It can't always be done. But if there's a general feeling of, my parent likes what I do, or my parent is interested, or whoever my caregiver is, and that there's something I'm doing that they're going to appreciate. And they're going to appreciate the hard thing as well, and maybe I can ask a different way of doing it. So that's where I think emotional state is critical, because if I'm worried, it's just going to, I think, like by osmosis, affect the child beside me. And then both of us are going to end up in a state.
Yeah.
Which I have done many times with my own children. So I'm not going to be totally fairy wand about it. It's not easy when you have dinner to put out, when you have something else going on, when there could be a medical condition in one of your children. It's not easy. So that's where, as a practice as a parent, comes in, even just to breathe, even just to ground myself, even just to, and my daughter has turned the tables on me. When I learned NLP years ago, and I'd be NLPing everybody in my house, and then I get it, I'm cooking something and something goes wrong, I drop something, and she would, when she was smaller, she would come over, put her hands on my shoulders and say, now ma'am, ground yourself and breathe. It's going to be, what way would you like to turn out? Which is very much future, going towards what way I want it to be, not what just happened. That's terrible. And sometimes it's just that pause and the stopping, and then going on. That actually makes the difference in our own emotional state. But we can get stuck in a spiral going down, or I can feed into when she says something and I say something back, or he says something back, and then there's no learning to be done. It's all agitation. So our emotions can really spill, and they can blur and blend. I often think of, when you drop paint into water and you were cleaning your brush, and then you get another paintbrush in and they all merge. Well, that's exactly like our emotions, with usually those that are nearest and dearest to us that we actually want to help. But it's usually those emotions are most heightened, and particularly after a school day. So I don't know if that's answered your question in a million different ways.
I really like that. I've never heard that before. Just pause. So I think that's a really, because I speak to many parents, especially in what we're doing with navigating your children. And that was one of the main things that was coming up afterwards, having coffee. So that I think that pause is a very good a piece of advice for parents, especially when their children come home and they're upset, or they think, they don't want to be reminded, as you say, as soon as they come out of the gate, oh, do you want to talk about it? So it's like changing that emotional state where they feel happy and the humor, and I think that breathing in, but the pause, no one's ever mentioned pause. So I think that's very powerful. Bernie, would you add anything more to that?
I love the way Lucy spoke about the state change, and I've used music,
Yeah.
happy music, to change the state. And then another thing that I always found useful was to have a snack, a drink of water or juice or milk or whatever, and to have a snack as well. So that kind of, it gives that that pause that you were talking about between school and starting again, and just listening to Lucy talking about the various different strategies she had. I can remember doing homework with my young nephew a good few years ago at this stage. And so when I was in school, we learned to do long division one way, and more recently, there's a different way of doing it. And we had great fun because we had a race. Because he started to do it, and I have no idea what you're doing. So he started to teach me. So I said, to tell you what, let's have a race, see who can answer this quickest. And we got to answering 5 sums before he looked at me, and it dawned on him, and it was like, oh, I've suddenly realized what you're doing with me. And then I said, no, well, this is a fun way, yes, of getting you to do your homework. But now for the next ones, I want you to teach me how, because I don't know how to do it like that. And then I'll show you how to do it my way too. So we got the homework done. Didn't always work, but it was a nice way of doing it. And humor really helps. And it isn't always possible to hold oneself in a humorous state. And it's not always appreciated by the learner either. So it's about recognizing what's going on.
And what's useful there in that situation as a parent is to say, I'm really feeling frustrated here, but bring back it to me how I'm feeling. I'm feeling frustrated here because I know you want to get the homework done, or I know whatever. What's the best way of us to do this? Rather than the child feeling, well, the parent has all the answers and they expect. So sometimes by even saying, look, I'm sorry, I was a bit annoyed earlier on when you came out of school, but that was because, do you know what happened to me earlier? So I think when we tell our children that we're feeling upset, frustrated, annoyed, disappointed, worried, all those things, for a start, it makes them normal because they are part of the human condition. All those, I wouldn't even call them negative feelings. They're just feelings that reflect things that didn't go our way. And then say, well, how will we best go with that? So that was a great idea, Bernie, doing a little race with the maths. And something else went through my head there and I went out again about the strategy for doing what we're doing and the teaching of it. So sometimes when I teach a child to learn spelling in a different way, so typically it's phonics in school is a strong way of teaching. It's an auditory way. There is a visual component, but it's very much sounds and blending sounds. It doesn't suit all our learners, particularly our very visual creative learners who love seeing. So when I teach a child another way, I won't say a different way, another way of making that word as a form stay so I can see it, recall it, know the meaning of it, then if I get them to teach somebody else, or even go home and teach your dog, it doesn't have to be a person who's going to answer you back, or teach somebody else. And there is a story about one little boy came out and he started, I'm going to teach my friend this because it's a great way. But as soon as you teach somebody else something, it reinforces it for you. And of course, it gets shared, but it does solidify, now I have that because I'm able to tell somebody else about it. So the fact that he had to tell you about long division, Bernie, made it, it had to get very, very strong in his own mind what the steps are, where I'm going to go to. So, so another way for a parent is, will you tell me how to do that one? Because it's so long ago, I can't remember. And it's, again, it enables the child, it's building on the strengths of a child, maybe to talk, to expand, all those things that they mightn't have full confidence in. So in the security of their own home, they mightn't do it in the classroom, but they might do it with a parent. Tell me how to do that. Tell me how you figured that out, because I have no idea.
That's really interesting, and especially now that links me on to the next thing we're talking about. Tell us how you do that, and changing the emotional state and getting into the state. Limiting beliefs. So when they're in that state, they have a limiting belief. They're stressed. So, limiting beliefs. How would you sort of, with your experiences, lady, how would you get children out of that negative self-limiting belief state to actually clear their mind so they do have that clarity? I know we talked about, raising your eyes and what we've just talked about. But when you change your limiting beliefs, it does empower self-confidence to confidently do a task. So talk to me about that. Bernie, we'll come to you first.
Sometimes it can even be bringing the awareness to the child or the adult about what it is they're actually believing. So they might even hear themselves say something about, I can't do that. And then simply to very gently ask a question, who says you can't? And then to pick that apart. Because it might have been something that was inadvertently said either to the child or within the child's hearing, and the child themselves mightn't realize they've heard it and they've taken it on board and they've made a decision around, well, I'm going to believe this is true. But they're too young to do all the logical figuring out. It's just the way it is. And it's their perception. So it could be the tone of voice that's used, the way somebody looked at them, the way somebody said something. And it's their perception of the look, the tone of voice, what was said. So sometimes just gently challenging and saying, who said? And then having the conversation, well, do you really believe that? And what lets you know you can't do it? And I wonder if, so that what if, I wonder if, how would that be? Or imagine, or step out into the future you who knows how to do this and bring that back so that you'll be able to do it now. Um, so I suppose it's sitting with it. It's pacing them, meeting them where they're at. So you're not saying you shouldn't be believing this. You're acknowledging that it's okay to believe that. And is there a different way to believe? And how would it be if they believed that way? And then maybe keeping an eye out and doing things to positively reinforce it for them over time.
And Lucy?
Hmm. I love all those little taglines like imagine if or what if. And imagine if is wonderful. And I mentioned Disney before, but Disney was such an imaginary mind, and but also very practical mind and strategy. So I bring Disney into lots of things as we do in NLP, but particularly with children. And one little girl, and I'll just go back to spelling because that's where I often start with children who feel they can't. And that's a belief. I can't. I'm not a good speller. I can't spell anything. Oh, can you anything? Oh no, I don't spell well. Anything well? You know, even to add on, what word can you spell? Oh, well, I can spell this, and they can write or whatever. Oh, and how are you doing that? And how do you know it's that? And maybe whatever the word is, say if it was girl, or no, we won't take girl, that's the wrong one, but say if it was a horse, and I'll take away the E at the end of the horse. Well, how do you know it's that one and not that one? Well, I just know. How do you know you know? Because they're seeing it. Well, I know it's there. It's a word I know I've sorted in my head for a long time ago. I know it's HORSE and there's an E at the end and there always is. I thought, well, now you know that. So let me show you how you know that. And that goes into the metacognition of how our words and letters being stored, where are they going, how are they being attached to the image, which gives the meaning to the word or the context. And that really starts to shift that limiting belief, because usually limiting beliefs are very general. They're for everything. I'm not a good speller. I can't do, I never write well. If we're talking about the classroom based the things we hope children will do in a classroom or develop those particular skills. And often children see those as the only skills, as opposed to, I can't do anything. Oh, can you tell me a joke? Oh, yeah. Oh, are you kind? Are you this? So to bring in, can you be kind? Can you be, are you a friend sometimes? Oh, well, I can do that. So it's building up, not as we call 21st century skills. So the skills that are not just reading, writing, maths, getting all the work done on time, because speed is often a thing that we say is a measure of the thing that was done. If we do it fast, that's not always necessarily the right thing. However, what other things are you good at? Can you figure out a different way of doing this? That's creativity. Creativity isn't always the art that has to look like everybody else's art. Are you able to take apart this and put it back together? Are you able to help your friend out if he's stuck? Oh yeah. What do you do out in the pit? So it's emphasizing all the strengths that a child has is another way of, it's like getting that limiting belief and just kind of dissolving it a little bit, or making the edges blurry, which is again is another NLP technique of changing around how that's internalized. Because usually a child will tell you. I had a little boy recently and he had a pressure here. He said it was all there, just at his temples. And I said, God, if that had a shape, what would it be? He said, oh, it's spiky. It had all these spikes and it was throbbing and it was moving. So we played around with it and we got some sanding kind of machine. We made it up and we sanded all the spikes on that thing that was in, that he felt the pressure of the thing he's been asked to do by his family. And oh, kind of changed it. And then I said, can you get it to stay really still? And maybe we'll, if it had been really hot, put it into cold water or ice cubes. And all of a sudden it just shifted a little bit, the thing that he was feeling inside about the thing out there, if that makes sense. And to NLP people, it will make sense. We're changing those submodalities of what's internalized, but in a way that also helps to dissolve a limiting belief of what I believe to be true about myself every time I do this, or every time I'm asked that, or every time means always. Does it? Not always. So there's so many ways, aren't there, Bernie, of changing. And Roisin, I'm sure you see your eyes are flying there as well. So I know you're thinking of things. But that's another part of this, is the visual acuity, is looking at the learner as they're learning, or looking at someone as you're talking. Because I could think I'm brilliantly explaining something and I'm full of enthusiasm, and it has landed a completely different way. And I could be seeing this and not noticing. But Roisin, your face is lighting up, so I'm sure you were
Yes, because
considering something of what we were both saying.
I thought that was very good with a little boy, what shape is it in his head, and what does it look like, and getting the sandpaper, because he was physically removing when we have, I always say, when as NLP, where do you feel it in your body? If you're stressed, where do you feel it? And so he was feeling it here. So you were removing that negative emotion, the negative self limiting beliefs, the emotion attached to it. And also you were showing him how to remove the physical reaction to the limiting belief and the emotion to it.
And I think showing him that he actually had a little bit of control and autonomy over that. It is always helpful if somebody else is guiding you, because that little negative thing on our shoulder is really loud a lot of the time. So if you have a coach, or if you have somebody who's just going to help you play around and shift that, having asked all those questions, as Bernie said, just ask the questions. It can change the belief, it can turn it around, or even making it one bit different makes it different. The difference that makes the difference in how we see ourselves is moving along in the way we want towards something different. And as I say to children, a little bit better than before. So we're not aiming at that horrible word of perfect, just a bit better than before. We're not fixing, because that's for machines, a little bit better than before. And how does that feel now? And I always think a little bit better, it has to be a little bit better in whatever element that is.
And I think this conversation, lady, it's really given me a lot of food for thought, but also made me feel, wow, if the energy, the vitality, and the information that's coming out of the two of you today, what you're telling us, two parents, is very powerful. And it's going to change not just the children's lives, but the parents' lives, and how they communicate with their children about a difficult situation in school. And once we change that difficult situation in school, or remove limiting beliefs, becoming aware of our states, becoming aware of our language, our eye movements, that transfers not just from the classroom, not just from school, but outside their lives, like the pebble effect, the ripple effect. And it really does transform their lives. It was like, I was thinking when you was talking, Lucy, as well, I couldn't spell. And my mother used to say, sure, you're just like me. I can't spell either. She's making me feel good. You're just like me. You can't spell either. I put I's and E's where they shouldn't be. And I remember learning the word Mississippi. And I can't remember how I learned that, but I remember geography. Mickey McDade in Sedan School. And he was in my primary 7, which would be 6th class. And he in the class, he had words, and think about it now, he knew exactly what he was doing. He was do all the spellings for that week, and then the difficult spellings, he had a different half of the blackboard. And he used to say, and now look, I'm visually remembering, my eyes is automatically going, and he said, geography. Do you know how I spell geography to this day? And I cannot spell it. I have to say, writing, George eats oats. Granny rode a pony home yesterday.
That's a good one.
Isn't it? Especially where you have this visualization. And I remember laughing in class. I still see it. He was wearing a check coat and a black shirt. I still see him. Right? And I remember bursting out laughing. Granny rode a pony home yesterday and visualized my 2 grandmothers riding the pony, because I used to ride ponies. I thought, God, I'd love to see them on a pony. Isn't it funny how, to this day, I had one teacher how I could learn how to write. And Mississippi was another word. And there was another word I can't remember. There were 3 of them. And, but it's also that memory to a word I couldn't spell. And how that humor of that picture in George eats oats. Granny rode a pony home yesterday.
That's so funny. But you're after highlighting, Roisin, nearly all the learning styles within that little story. You know, because you've got the sound of all those words. You're seeing GEOGRAPHY, which I can see straight away as you're describing that. And I wonder, is it black block capitals or was it different, you know? So, but you've got a story, and most of all, you've got humor, and you've got feeling, which is another part of the kinesthetic part, but also it was moving. So you've got the visual, you've got the auditory, you've got a sense of it all. And that's how it nearly was all encapsulated and has become a really strong memory for you.
Yeah.
Which is
And he
wonderful.
passed away last year.
Oh.
And I sort of broke my heart that he passed away, because we were on Facebook. And a couple of years ago, he sent me a friend request. I said, oh, Mr. What was I say? It was Mickey McDade. Mr. McDade. Roisin, so you're too old to be calling me Mr. You know, I said, I didn't think you would remember me. He says, I remember the day you came into school, because I went into his class after we returned back from Africa, and he was able to tell me exactly.
Wow.
That, you know, when you think that was, oh God, nearly 50 years later, you know. But ladies, I think this has been a very powerful panel discussion, interview, or information. And I'd love to even talk more about the MBIT. Is it MBIT? Look, I don't know, I must have some emotion there. Some MBIT, because I think that would be very powerful as well for this conversation going forward, and talking more about, I think, children making learning fun. And to me, learning is a discovery. And it's like magical discovery of opening up the big box of jewels and finding them from the pirates, and you know, you find them in the cave. Oh wow, what's this? And it's about fun. And I think that's the most important thing when you can give a child, is the gift of fun in the gift of learning.
Yeah, agreed. And the gift of curiosity. Yeah.
Yes. And I think maybe it's because when I was younger, we lived in, I had different educational systems. I had the English, I had the Irish, I had the American. And it was like always the fun of learning different things, learning and traveling in Africa and in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia. And it was always fun learning. And then once we knew we got the fun, I think that's what I love about the pause. Because we used to leave school and our homework. And we used to go either to the swimming pool, we used to go to the stables with the horses, we used to go to the tennis courts, and then we used to meet up. And it was fun after school as well. And the teachers were fun, and they cared. And I think that's something, is knowing a teacher cares about how you learn, what you're learning. And I think that's really powerful, and making it fun, full, as you said, Lucy, curiosity. And Bernie, understanding the learning styles. And I love the NLP learning styles, the VAK and the VARK, and just knowing how we learn, how we absorb information, and then how we put it to good use confidently and safe in the knowledge. Well, I have different ways of learning, and yet I can implement them, and I can use all the different learning styles as in the recipe of learning.
And be curious about the other ones that exist and building on those.
Yes.
You know, so I think it's always moving on to adding in something new, which is learning. It's always the new thing connected with the old thing, and then another step on. So I think that's the wonderful part of being a lifelong learner. And when we even can tell children, oh, I'm still learning as an adult, I didn't know that before.
Yeah.
You know, so it makes learning in its broadest sense. It's learning the things and the things that have to be done in school, but it's also learning about how I am, how I'm doing what I'm doing, and learning all kinds of things. Like, do you know how to learn lift that ball in camogie? I can't do that. You know, and even, you know, a guy who's going to take a kick for the conversion in rugby, they're grounding, they're visualizing, same as a golfer, excuse me, he can't see where the ball is meant to go. So he is visualizing that last part. So when sport is a great example to help children realize, oh, I'm learning there as well. And I'm visualizing there. Oh, well, if you can see all that in your head, wait till I show you how you can do that with your letters. Because it's the same skill, but it's overlapping it on using letters or numbers. And I do that. I have a very visual way of teaching times tables or teaching rhyme, and children go, oh, I didn't know I could do it that way. So as you said, Roisin, it is when you make it fun and curious, because you know, everything can't be kind of ha fun, but it can be interesting, and it can be curious and enthusiastic, all those things. As Bernie knows, when we're adding in and moving towards something different.
And it's when you're moving forward to something different, it's about chunking it down to smaller steps sometimes, and knowing, okay, I know I'm here and I have to move forward. I'm here, so how am I going to get there? And people forget, it's understanding that, okay, how am I going to get there? There's going to be difficulties in learning the new skill, learning how to spell. But as you said, the pause, being patient with ourselves, and just incorporating all that together. Ladies, there's so much to talk about on this subject and topic, and NLP will be here until the cows come home, never mind the horses, the cows come home. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak to Confident Women Ireland and the Irish Political Roundup on this. And there's so much more to talk about. I'm just really passionate. And what somebody said, I was filling out something the other day, and they wrote passionate. I go, no, I don't like passionate. It's too overused now. And I said, I care about. So I really do care about this this topic. I think from my own personal experience and how I overcame the experiences of my learning differences, and my children's learning differences, and it's to help other people with that as well. So thank you so much indeed, Bernie Rogers and Lucy Heary, for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to stop recording.